Hey, speaking of protests, there's a very important report from the Associated Press, which looked at the arrests that took place at and related to the various protests that we've seen around the country over the last several months. And the study found that most of the people arrested at the protests are not leftist radicals, are not affiliated with Antifa to the extent that one can be affiliated with Antifa. They are not anarchists or anarchists, as Donald Trump sometimes says, the way that Trump and his cronies and many Republicans have been portraying the small minority of individuals at protests. I don't call them protesters because the ones that are arrested, they're not protesting, they're doing other things. But let's reset a little bit before we get into the data. Since the George Floyd and anti-police brutality protests that we've seen, the Trumpian Republican line has been dangerous, violent, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist anarchists, or some combination thereof, are wreaking havoc, destroying things, burning things down. The left is violent, and this is the future of Joe Biden's America, even though it's Donald Trump's America right now. Now, all along, we knew the protests have been mostly peaceful, and there have been provocateurs, there have been rioters who are not protesters, who are provoking and rioting and committing crimes. And it is a very, very small number of people. Okay. The Associated Press looked at the roughly 300 people arrested at the various protests and found that most of the people arrested, even though the protests are happening in cities, are suburban adults who came into the cities where the protests took place from the exact suburbs that Donald Trump says he needs to protect from the urban people, which often is code for non-white people. But of course, there are urban white people and urban black people, urban Hispanic people, etc. Understand that those are the people coming into the cities to create chaos, commit some crimes and getting themselves arrested. Now, of course, there are people who got arrested from the nearly 300 whose political views, if you were to sit down with them and do an interview, are left-leaning political views. But there are plenty whose views are right-wing. There are plenty who are sort of not political and just taking advantage of a situation to provoke. Most have no affiliation with any particular group. Some have pre-existing criminal records, some don't. Some were illegally carrying weapons at the times of their arrests. Some were not. But certainly almost no, this idea of ties to Antifa, almost non-existent. Most no previous criminality, period. The most common charges against those arrested are, number one, arson, followed by illegal possession of a firearm. Just those two crimes are about 45% of all the arrests. And then you've got some of these vague civil unrest, disorderly conduct, impeding a federal officer, some property damage, some failing to obey a lawful order. And when you look at the list, lots of these are these sort of BS charges equivalent to resisting arrest. And I'm certainly including disorderly conduct in that, not obeying a lawful order. That can be a police officer says, leave now, and you leave, but too slowly. And the officer said too slowly in the opinion of the officer. And then the officer says, you're not obeying a lawful order, interfering with law enforcement. These can be BS charges or they can be legitimate. In all of these 286, I believe, charges, the only court documents that even reference Antifa are one case in Boston where there was suspected Antifa activity that was being investigated. That's certainly not definitive. That's the one reference. And of course, in the midst of this, there are plenty of instances of right-wing militia and far-right extremists who have been arrested. 2 Missouri militia members, 3 Boogaloo movement members. That's another right-wing group, and so on. So we have a report now, an investigation, which tells us what we already suspected, but the right either doesn't understand or won't accept. The other obvious issue with saying a person is part of Antifa, as we've talked about before, is that Antifa is not an organization. It's more an ideology. Mostly it's just benignly being anti-fascist. Now, even I, as someone who has said, I'm against many of the tactics that some operating under the name Antifa, the banner of Antifa, sometimes use. I am against fascism, but I'm not part of any organization. And there really is no organization, which is part of the double-edged sword, where you can accuse anyone of being part of an organization that isn't really an organization. It's like saying, I'm a member of white nationalism, as an example. Well, okay, that's really an ideology. There are groups that are heavily white nationalist in nature, like the KKK, but being a member of white nationalism makes about as much sense as being a member of Antifa. The other really important element to think about is whether or not Antifa is a group or an extremist group. It's actually irrelevant to the findings. The people from the left who are in the streets protesting are generally not violent. And unlike the right, they've not been radicalized by some monolithic right-wing media apparatus or by Trump or by QAnon. They're just normal people asking for change. And that is a totally separate issue from whether Antifa is or isn't an organization. Almost everybody participating in these protests has nothing to do whatsoever with the ideology nor with the organization. So if you're surprised, let me know. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. If you love feeding your intellectual curiosity, but you're always struggling to find the time, check out one of my all-time favorite apps called Blinkist. Blinkist lets you consume an entire book on your way home from work. They take thousands of popular nonfiction books, condense each one into text or audio that you can get through in just 15 minutes, and you get all of the important core ideas and information from that book. It's perfect if you don't have enough time to do all the reading you want to do, or if you just want to sample a book before you buy the entire thing. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.